Hello everyone. Today's class will be regarding the cerebellum. We will start with the cerebellum and let's see how much we will finish today. As we all know, we started with sensory receptor, then the ascending tracts within the spinal cord. Then we covered up the basal ganglia, because the basal ganglia, motor cortex and cerebellum, these three parts of the nervous system are the one which are involved in planning and programming a particular type of the voluntary movement. So I have told you many times in the previous lectures, but still I will repeat it again. Like there are these three parts. The motor cortex, I'll represent it by MC. Okay, that is the motor cortex. CBL is cerebellum and basal ganglia. So these three parts, they are the one which are involved in planning and programming a particular type of the voluntary movement. They interact with each other. And the final decision maker is motor cortex. Motor cortex finally will send a blue copy or a blueprint to the spinal cord. A blueprint of what kind of a movement spinal cord is supposed to order the distal muscle, the skeletal muscles, to perform a movement. Now, one copy is sent to the spinal cord and one copy of that blueprint is also sent to the cerebellum. Like this boss says to his subordinate that, hey, I have sent one copy to the spinal cord to perform or execute a particular type of the movement, and now you have to see whether he is doing his work okay or not. So what the cerebellum will do, it will get one copy back from the spinal cord, and now it will compare these two copies, the blueprint and what kind of the actual movement is happening over there. And if there is any imbalance, it will try to rectify it. Or we can say it will fine-tune the movement. So now we can conclude that cerebellum has got two functions. One is planning and programming of a movement, voluntary motor movement. Second is it helps in fine-tuning those movements. Okay, so these two are the major functions of cerebellum. Now, keeping this basic idea about the cerebellum, let's start with introduction part. So you have read in the 11th or 12th standard about a bit about the cerebellum. It is also known as little brain or hind brain, right? Because it is present in the posterior cranial fossa. And if we look at the structure of this one, this is the cerebellum, and if this is the brainstem going, so it is present in the posterior cranial fossa. Inferiorly over here, this is the occipital bone, and this part which separates it from the cerebral cortex is known as tentorium cerebelli, right? Tentorium cerebelli. That is its anatomical location. And embryologically, if you can recall back, it is derivative of metencephalon. And if you look at the size of this one, cerebellum, it's called as little brain. If you compare its size with the cerebral cortex, it is only 10% of the weight. 10% of the weight as that of the cerebral cortex. But if we look at the surface area, comparison of the surface area with the cerebral cortex, its surface area is 75% of that of the cerebral cortex. So it means this cerebellum, though having the weight as 10%, surface area is 75%, it means there is many a fold over there, multiple folds. These foldings are there, excessively folded compared to the cerebral cortex. And because of this folding, there are so many major or minor folding. Those are fissures. They are called as fissures. Okay, fissures. Out of those fissures, there are two concerned two features of the major concern. One is primary and the second one is posterolateral. Posterolateral. Now this posterolateral feature, it separates a bit of the vermis. Let's say if we look at the cerebellum structure, in the middle there is it's kind of a, if we try to draw the diagram this way, cerebellum. Pardon me for my bad drawing. I'll try to insert few of the actual diagram in between. Okay. So in the center, this is the vermis, and this vermis part, on each side it has cerebellar hemisphere. Okay. So this posterolateral feature, it separates out a bit of the vermis and a bit of these cerebellar hemispheres, like say a slice of this cerebellar hemisphere and slice of this cerebellar hemisphere. This vermis part, it is called as nodulus. It is called as nodulus, and this hemispherical part, these two, they are called as flocculus. So collectively we can call it flocculonodular lobe. Flocculonodular lobe, that is separated by posterolateral feature from the rest of the cerebellum. Now this primary feature, what does it do? It separates out anterior, it like divides cerebellum into anterior lobe and posterior lobe. Say this primary feature is passing through this part. So this part is anterior lobe and the remaining of the cerebellum is the posterior lobe. Then there are so many multiple features, minor features are there. They convert or they like divide the cerebellum into multiple folded like structure, and these folded, they are called as folia. They are called as folia. Okay. Now if we look at the connection of the cerebellum, I said it is located at the dorsal aspect of the brainstem, right? So we can say the cerebellum is present on the dorsal aspect of the pons and the medulla. Within the, say if this is the brainstem and this is the cerebellum, this part majorly is the pons and this is the medulla. Okay, and it is present on the dorsal aspect of the this brainstem. Pons and medulla separates out cerebellum from the rest of the brainstem, and there are three connections, three pathways through which the cerebellum is connected with the rest of the nervous system, and these three pathways are known as peduncles, cerebellar peduncles, and based on their location they are called as superior cerebellar peduncle, middle cerebellar peduncle, or the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Now because if we look at the structure, inferior cerebellar peduncle is present at the lowermost part, and below this one, below the brainstem, this is spinal cord. So the afferent fiber, mainly that's coming from the spinal cord and all these, the afferent fiber, afferent to the cerebellum, it enters via the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Afferent fibers, majority of the afferent fibers gain the entry via inferior cerebellar peduncle, and majority of efferent which are going away from the cerebellum will travel the superior cerebellar peduncle. And middle cerebellar peduncle, it's kind of a mix, but if we compare those afferent and efferent, percentage of the efferent fiber is more among the middle cerebellar peduncle. Now there are few fibers which also gain the entry via the middle cerebellar peduncle, the afferent fibers. Okay, so these three are the connections. Now this vermis has been further subdivided into 10 parts, and they have been named according to like say numerical 1 to 10, or there are certain names given to different each part of the worm is. So that's we won't go into detail because that is the job of anatomy people. They will teach you about the further detail anatomy of the cerebellum. Now we have got the basic idea, like how we can say there are the two lateral cerebellar hemisphere, one central part, that's a worm is, and we know that it helps in fine tuning the movement, planning and fine tuning. So if we look at this one, because it is fine tuning, and these voluntary movements, they are the motor movements, they are being performed by the skeletal muscle. So as there is topographic representation of the entire body within the cerebral cortex, like there is motor homunculus and sensory, right, within the cerebral cortex, which represents topographically each part of the body. Similarly, within the cerebellum, there is topographic representation of the entire skeletal system because it helps in fine tuning the movement. So skeletal muscles are involved, and this topographic representation is present within this vermis and lateral hemisphere. So based on these things, we can say we can functionally divide these parts into three parts. One is the central one, the vermis, because it is the medial most, so it controls the medial most part of our skeletal system. If we try to draw, like say this is a particular individual, this chap, this is the axial skeleton, right? This is the axial skeletal system, and this part is the proximal part of the limb musculature. So the axial as well as the paraaxial, we can call it, or the proximal limb musculature, this part is controlled by the centralmost vermis one. That is the representation of this part within the vermis. Okay, and now this distal musculature of the limb, this distal musculature on both the sides, it is represented by the surrounding area of the vermis, and this area is called, representation is called as intermediate hemisphere. Okay, intermediate in between the vermis and the rest of the hemisphere. Now what is the function of this remaining part of the hemisphere, this lateral hemisphere, lateral part? It helps in planning and programming. It helps in planning and programming. So topographically the entire body is represented in this medialmost part, like the vermis and paravermial part, that is the intermediate hemisphere. Okay. So this is how the cerebellum appear. Like this green one is flocculonodular lobe, and pink one is anterior lobe, and this blue one is posterior lobe, right? And flocculonodular lobe is separated from the rest of cerebellum via posterolateral fissure. And this vermis, it's kind of a, why it is called as vermis, because in appearance it's worm like. If we close the anterior end with the posterior end of a worm, say like say this is the worm, wriggling worm, if we close it, so it gives the shape of the worm, that is the vermis, right? That is why it is called as vermis. If you look over here in this diagram, this is the anterior lobe and this green one is the posterior lobe, and this part is posterolateral or flocculonodular lobe separated by posterolateral fissure. The part of the cerebellum is divided into three parts: the flocculonodular lobe, then the anterior and the posterior. Now these three parts, they have been given different name based on different classification. If we divide or classify it as phylogenetical, phylogenetical means in order of evolution or development. So the oldest part of the cerebellum is flocculonodular lobe, and this older part is known as archicerebellum. Okay, so mainly the entire of the flocculonodular lobe and a bit of the, we can say, a part, initial part of the vermis, that is the lingula. So we won't go into the finer detail about the different name of the vermis. So just remember the archicerebellum is flocculonodular lobe. The second one is in the development, that is the paleo-cerebellum, and that is the anterior lobe, almost entire of the anterior lobe and a bit of posterior lobe. So we will focus on entire of the anterior lobe with the paleo-cerebellum. Then the latest one, that is the neocerebellum. That is the remaining part of the cerebellum that happens to be the posterior lobe, majority of the posterior lobe. That is the phylogenetic classification. So flocculonodular lobe falls under archicerebellum part, right? Archicerebellum, flocculonodular lobe. Okay, and paleo-cerebellum is anterior lobe, and neocerebellum is posterior part. A bit of like say anterior lobe and flocculonodular lobe plus lingula comes over here, so we will exclude lingula, so we won't go into that detail, just remember this thing. Okay, that is the phylogenetical. Now there is one more classification, and that classification is functional classification. Functional means what are the functions, like which part of cerebellar hemisphere is concerned with which function. So the flocculonodular lobe, if we look at the name, flocculonodular lobe, oculo is concerned with eye, and then flow, go with the flow, that is the balance. Okay, balance. So the function of the flocculonodular lobe is eye movement and balance. It's not the derivative of these, oculo is eye and flow, go with flow is the balance. That is to make you understand or make you memorize easily. So that's not the reason like why it is called as flocculo, but to remember it. You will never forget like oculo is concerned with the eye, oculo eye movement, flow, go with flow, balance. Okay, that's the one way of remembering the thing. So flocculonodular lobe. Now this paleo-cerebellum. Yes, the name has been given functional classification. The archicerebellum or flocculonodular lobe has been given name as vestibulocerebellum. Okay, vestibulo. You must be knowing vestibule, vestibular system or vestibular apparatus is concerned with the balance. So that is the vestibular cerebellum. Now the paleo-cerebellum, functionally it is called as spinocerebellum. And spinocerebellum is mainly concerned with like the anterior lobe and all these things fall under the spinocerebellum. So it is concerned with the skeletal system, like we can say it involves the axial and para-axial part of the body, skeletal system, the movement fine tuning. Okay, now the third one is neocerebellum, and functionally it is called as corticocerebellum. And this cortico, it is as the name, that's not the region of like derivative, corticocerebellum, cortex. So this part is majorly concerned with the planning. It's not exclusive planning done by the neo or exclusive this axial and paraxial system control, but major function of the paleo is to fine tune the axial and paraxial system fine movements. Neo is concerned with the thinking, and this archi is concerned with the eye movement and balance maintenance. Okay. So after reading about all these things, ultimately we can say the flocculonodular lobe, it is concerned with balance and eye movement, and with connection with the vestibular nuclei. It will have connection with the vestibular nuclei and helps in maintaining the balance and eye movement. Then we can say the vermis part and paravermial or intermediate hemisphere that we talked in. Okay, so this vermis and intermediate zone, it is involved with executing a particular movement, ongoing motor execution. Now the remaining part of the hemisphere, that is the lateral part, lateral hemisphere, that helps in planning and coordination. Okay, that helps in planning and programming or coordination. Okay. And this is how the paravermial and vermial, this is the vermal part and this is closer to it paravermial part, right, and the rest of the lateral hemisphere is for coordination. or planning and programming of the movement concerned part, right. And this one, see, this is the spinocerebellar part, this one is vestibulocerebellar to vestibular nuclei, balance and eye movement, and the rest of the lateral hemisphere is cerebrocerebellum for motor and premotor motor planning, motor execution via spino, motor planning via cerebro, and balance and eye movement via vestibulocerebellum. Okay. So, this is how it will appear. The worm is intermediate, helps in ongoing motor execution, and this is how the topographic representation within the cerebellum of the skeletal system. This is the head, this is the upper limb, this is the lower limb. If we cut it out and separate it out like in this way. Okay.